Hello and welcome to Make the Logo Bigger. My name is Brenton. This podcast is your gateway into the world of advertising production, crafted especially for those who are stepping in new, aiming to become producers, or simply eager to understand the inner workings of advertising and marketing. We're here to share insights and knowledge you've been looking for, with stories, tips, and real conversations from the pros. We're simplifying the process for everyone with a production curiosity. Whether you're just starting out or keen to explore the production side of ads, you've found the right place. Let's jump in. Episode 23 has us chatting with Jon Paul-Jacques, or JPJ, as is more widely known, a creative leader whose journey from web design to executive creative director has spanned some of the biggest agencies and brands in the world. Now, for the past 9 years, JPJ has been the executive creative director on the Ford account, leading all their large-scale campaigns that have shaped the brand's creative direction across the region. Starting out in the early days of digital, JPJ cut his teeth at TBWA Sydney before moving through the WPP network, leading creative teams across Australia and Asia. Now, having witnessed firsthand how digital advertising has evolved from handcrafted, highly creative executions to more templated, data-driven formats, he brings a unique perspective on balancing creativity with measurable impact. In this episode, we break down his career trajectory and how creative thinking has evolved in an era of automation and data. We also talk about the differences between the markets of Sydney, Melbourne, and Shanghai, the balance between art and commerce, and why choosing the right producer is just as crucial as selecting the right director. JPJ. JPJ, welcome. Appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk all things creative. I always ask people at the start, I say, all right, give us a brief rundown about your journey from you started as a designer, I believe.
I did.
And now you've made your way all the way up to ECD at, what do they call them these days? Is it just VML?
It's just VML these days, yes. I've had all number of three-letter acronyms throughout my career. But first of all, thank you for having me on. It's great to sort of talk about this and talk about the industry. I started off as a web designer, so I didn't have any aspirations of working in advertising at all. I was writing that new thing called the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I started off as a web designer working for a content company called K-Grind that was in Sydney, lasted about a year, and then imploded in the dot-com crash of 2000. So that was really a great experience. A lot of content creation, but that was wrapped around me. But my job was mainly web design. And then I kind of came out of that and moved into TBWA in Sydney. Half of our team from K-Grind moved over and formed the new department called Tequila, which was essentially digital and direct marketing. So yeah, that's how I kind of came into advertising. Worked there for a while, worked with some really great people there in TBWA Sydney. Done a lot of sort of award-winning work there, mainly because no one had done it before, like a lot of website sort of advertising-based work. Worked for PlayStation, Strongbow, Qantas, a lot of different brands. And then I moved into the WPP world through Wunderman. So I headed up their creative department for the digital side of things. So it was called the interactive department back then. And then I was both at Wunderman and Y&R for a long time in Sydney before moving down to Melbourne at the then named George Pat's Y&R. So I was part of that George Pat's merger. So stayed there for a while. Again, worked across the Y&R group of brands before then moving to China. So we opened up a new division for Ford for Asia Pacific that was headed in, the central team was in Shanghai. So I was doing a bit of work for Ford then, and then I went 100% just working for Ford. Spent 5 years in Shanghai. Started off as the digital lead for the region, and then eventually kind of worked my way up to the overall creative lead. So I was the ECD for Asia Pacific for quite a while there. Then family sort of got bigger and wanted to come home after the craziness of living in China for 5 years. And so, yeah, moved back to Melbourne, continued working with what was then called Blue Hive, which then became GTB, which now is renamed to VML. So I've been working in that kind of integrated WPP team sort of structure for quite a while now, and that's what I'm doing today.
Nice. So you bounced around quite a lot. First of all, what's the difference between Melbourne and Sydney? Are there any?
Oh, someone told me a story ages ago. It's kind of a bit off topic, but they said if you met Sydney and Melbourne at a bar, you'd want to spend the night with Sydney, but you'd marry Melbourne. And I actually kind of think that's true. I don't know. Like, I grew up in Sydney. I'm from Sydney, but Melbourne's friendlier. Oh, it's controversial things that I'm saying right now.
Don't step into that realm. Well, what about work-wise when it comes to the work? I would assume that there's more company head offices in Sydney, so then there would be more work per se. Would that be about right?
Yeah, I think that there's a greater volume of work in Sydney. There's probably more brand centered there, but I do feel that's definitely 10 years ago, Melbourne was much more of a creative hub. There was a lot more sort of more interesting, different work coming out of Melbourne. It had a little bit more soul to the work as opposed to the higher volume. That's if you're going to be, very critical about it, not diminishing the work coming out of Sydney. But I think there was probably more conversation, more action, I suppose, coming out of Sydney overall. And I think that's still prevalent to a degree. Most of the major hubs and the majority of the money is probably going through the Sydney offices. But I think Melbourne still has a really good knack for more nuanced, sort of culturally sort of specific work.
And then you take that, and what's it like in China when you compare it to Melbourne and Sydney? But then, well, let's compare it to Melbourne, but then just Australia in general.
Yeah, I mean, China was very fast. China was really about volume. The teams were massive. So, where here I'm working in a team of 30. I worked in a team of 380, at one stage in Shanghai. And that was just on one client. So just the volume of work was a lot higher, a lot more fast paced. There was the expectation of being able to deliver volume at scale, really quickly, really quick sort of turnaround work was an expectation. I do believe the general working culture was, you spend all of your waking hours there. Most people came in late, but they stayed very late in the office. And maybe a bit more disposable, as in like the work was in and out, forgotten quickly, moved on. But having said that, I was very impressed with the creative output in Shanghai. There was some amazing work coming out of there. Really sort of left of field sort of projects, big budgets, but really sort of quite interesting work coming out of those offices that, we would never really hear about for local clients. But yeah, very interesting, very hungry and very high-paced, competitive environment.
I can imagine. And what's some of the work? Is there any work that sticks out particularly or jobs that you did that you think, wow, that if that was in Australia, that would, that'd win awards? I
mean, they did win they did win a lot of awards for campaigns. There was a lot of really high quality craft. There was a campaign for Samsonite that they basically created a big sculpture of the path that your bag took. It was called Heaven and Hell. It was like, this is what your sort of path goes through the airport system, and this is what your bag does. And it was like a big frieze that they had done, like an analogy for heaven and hell through the airport. Amazing work, but someone built that, and the level of craft was just unbelievable. There's a real good poetic nature to a lot of their work. That craft was an important component. So yeah, that's one thing that generally stood out. If they really wanted to spend the time on that level of quality, they were very, very good at it.
Going back to when you started out, one thing I think is so important for people are mentors. Did you have any in the early days? Because again, you came from a design background, web design, and then you've moved into, it's a creative field, but you've certainly probably taken more of that path of thinking about creative, coming up with creative ideas. What was that jump like for you? And did you have anybody that helped show you the shortcuts or give you the tools and the ideas necessary?
Yeah, so a lot of different mentors, and from different fields within the industry, I think. Like my first one that comes to mind is a guy called Chris James, who was my creative director, both at K Grind, and then he took me over to TBWA. The work ethic that he instilled in me right from the start, I think I've always appreciated that. Like the want and the drive to put in the hard work to make it the quality that you need it to be. Pushing yourself a little bit further in the work in those early days, I think that was really instrumental in, developing the foundations of my career overall. So I'm always very thankful to him for that. But there's other outside of just the creative space. I think the relationships I had with people in account service, producers, even CEOs of the different businesses I've worked within, they give you so many different skills, probably things that you don't realize at the time. And then, someone might say something to you afterwards and you're like, oh, I definitely got that trait from that person. Surprisingly, a lot of account service people who've helped me sort of, understand more why we're doing the work, not just how good it looks or, the quality of the creative output, but the business side of things, I think has been really sort of fundamental on my progression.
So talk to us about that. You start out, obviously when you're a junior, you come in and you're on the tools, and that's where you start out, that's where you work, that's where you progress. But then as you move through the ranks, you start to obviously get a better understanding for the business side itself. What's it like trying to balance when there's a business outcome, yet you want to do great work and that the idea needs to be something that's maybe a bit different, a bit left of field, but what's it like trying to juggle those responsibilities?
Yeah. There's so many different ways of tackling this. One thing people say with creative is like, there's two sides of it. There's the art and the science within, what we do in advertising. Your designer side wants to be the artist, right? You want to make it look awesome, and you have a personal sort of attachment to that. It's like your baby. It's like, I want to create this visual expression of whatever it is I'm doing. But then there's the science side of things. It's like, it needs to do a job. It needs to be well researched. It needs to point things in the right direction. It needs to have an outcome or a call to action or whatever it may be. It also needs to be done on time. So, the balance of those two things is important. To be honest, I think your heart wants to spend as much time as you can possibly spend on it to make it look awesome. Like, that's just a sort of, basic need of any art sort of, designer type person. You're always given a deadline, which kind of sucks. We never have enough time. But on the flip side, you also need to understand that it's got a job to do. And, the level of investment that you put into it needs to be reflective of what it's supposed to do, because it is a commercial thing that you're usually creating. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but understanding that business side, I suppose, allows you to kind of figure out how much emotional attachment you're going to put into it. You also find projects where you just personally go, I want this thing to kick ass, so I'm going to put my, blood, sweat, and tears into it as much as I can, from a personal point of view, to make it as awesome as you can make it.
So from your time at TBWA to now, what's the speed like for creative? I know that it's faster.
Yeah.
Does it impact ideas?
Yeah, it's faster, but I want to say it's more templated. I know that's a kind of weird answer. If I think about the interactive stuff, like the digital types of things, back in the early 2000s, we were handcrafting digital stuff. And what I mean by that is there weren't so many templates. Inside a banner ad, you could do whatever the hell you want as long as it was within the file size. And so it was actually a much more creative exercise. Banner ads were way more creative, 15 years ago, 20 years ago than what they are now. Nowadays, because it is about, it's so data metrics kind of driven, it's more about getting it in front of the person at the right time and with the right message and getting out, giving them another one. It's much more templated. Even web design overall, we've become a lot more, held in by the best UX or the well-tested UX that has been tested over, the last however many years. We know that that's the right sort of solution. And that actually takes away a lot of the artistic creativity that used to be in web design. It was much more fluid and much more diverse and all sorts of different random things within that space. So I think that the data has locked us into certain patterns that work, but that means that we're sort of a little bit more constricted, creatively. Having said that, that's sort of more at an executional level, the ideas that you sort of bring into it. So it's a lot more complex. There's a lot more elements that we've got to play with to make whatever it is that we're doing work.
You get a campaign. Traditionally, there was TV, radio, print, maybe some billboards. Now there's just so many different channels. So when you have an idea and you have to start building it, do you intuitively know that you've got to have to create just a plethora of smaller little bits that feed off of that main idea?
Yep. So I think that there's two parts to this. One is the basics of your media kind of landscape, as they say. So, from social video, social static things, out of home, banner ads, TVCs, 30-second spots. So it's like there is the sort of standard shape boxes that you need to put something in. That's one side of our output. But then I think the other side of our output, which is much more creatively interesting, is, things that are generating word of mouth, things that are generating buzz or awareness in more of a, PR sense or a kind of just a cultural sense or a service-based sort of idea. Like there are so many other things that we can create outside of those standard advertising boxes that usually need filling. So supposed to answer a little bit more directly, from a media point of view, we know that there are certain things that we create just to get scale and to get depth in terms of being able to connect with the general population. Call that the advertising side. But if we're going to change hearts and minds, it's usually the other types of activities and other ideas that are going to give you that spike of energy that you're looking for in a campaign.
Do you find that you have to spend more time working on a project though? Now you've got so many multiple channels. Yeah. Are you finding you're having to burn more head hours just trying to come up with different executions for all these different channels that are required?
If you're using the channels, if you've got individual ideas for the specific channel, right? So let's just say something simple like YouTube. I mean, you can create YouTube ads. It's just basically a TV ad. It's like a 15-second spot. That's a disruptive thing. But if you're going to use YouTube well, then you're talking about much more longer form storytelling, short form elements, entertainment, information. You're starting to dive into the reason why YouTube was created, and the different things that YouTube's really good at. That's much, much more complex in terms of what you've got to plan and the stories that you need to tell. It's a very different exercise than just creating your ad that you're going to then put at the start of a piece of content, in a normal media sort of sense. So yeah, those two actions are quite different. I think one is you're making ads, the other one's you're making a tool for people to use to learn something or to be entertained, or to feel something. Yeah, you're right. They do involve a lot more energy and effort to produce. And a lot more production, to be honest, as well. yes, production is getting easier and cheaper, but we're also creating a whole lot more. You make a 5-minute video, you've still got to produce 5 minutes worth of good footage and good content, good storytelling.
Yes, and trying to hold people's attention for 5 minutes, I guess it's got to be quite compelling. What do you find fun these days? I've got to see you work on set, and it was discussed between myself and my colleagues that the job that we worked on recently, you were quite engaged. You seemed to really love it, and we noticed anyway. Put another term, I think it was you were frothing on just being on set and creating. What do you find these days? What's the stuff that you find the most fun about your role?
Shoots are always the most fun part. Like coming up with, there's two really sort of fun parts, I think, to any kind of good production process. One is coming up with the initial idea. When you kind of crack an idea for the brief, you can feel the excitement in the room. People are, talking over the top of each other. There's a lot of energy all of a sudden. Just before that, it's usually a bit dull and it's like, what are we going to? And then someone says something and then you're off. It's like this whirlwind of sort of stuff that happens. And it all feels awesome. It's like the best thing ever. Then half of it falls away for various reality reasons. But that energy that you've got while you're coming up with that idea and you can see that it's going to work is very addictive. And then the other one is when you're on set and you're seeing it through the lens come to life. For some reason, footage looks really cool on set when you're looking at it just after you had a take. You see that shot of a car coming up over the hill or whatever, you're like, oh my God, that looks amazing. That is quite cool. And you're going to really interesting places. You're standing in a field somewhere on a morning looking at the mountains behind you. You're like, oh, how awesome is it that I'm here doing this? Those moments are pretty awesome. And shoots can take it to some pretty random places, which, it's amazing to be out there and sort of creating something, but also experiencing the world in that way is really cool.
You were mentioning how addictive it can be coming up with the ideas. And when you crack it or you gain that insight, the excitement that it creates. For new people coming through, particularly creatives, is there any advice for them to help get them to that place a bit quicker, to find those insights? Or is it a trust thing with themselves? Is it don't discount, every creative says it, don't discount any ideas that you have in your time.
Yeah.
And when leading your teams these days, is there anything you say to them or advice that you give them?
So I think there's a lot of tools. Like every agency has different tools and methods that they use. I've used one that I got from an ACD in Shanghai. It's called a 9-box. So it's sort of like 9 different ways of tackling a brief. It allows you to very quickly fill in 9 boxes with your first thoughts, and it throws you off in different directions. That's a tool that I've found very useful. It's just a practical sort of, getting your ideas down on paper tool. 9-box, different processes and so forth. I think all of them are very valid. And, people just need to find the right tool that works for them. I think sitting down and sort of grinding ideas can sort of really sort of weigh people down. I don't think that's a process that allows for that one idea that's going to pop out and sort of make you excited. I think conversations with other people is always very valuable. You never know where someone might take you and where you're going to take them, which is why we have a team structure inherently in creative, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an art director and a copywriter, but having a group of people sit down and talk about an idea, even for half an hour, can actually generate quite a lot of stuff, quite exciting work. So I think that, number one, having people around you, the support of different people will lead to better ideas, undoubtedly. Not grinding on sort of the one direction, the one approach so much, and then using any tool, any process that can push your head into different sorts of places. Being able to look at an idea from different angles is where the sort of more insightful solutions are going to come from.
Do you ever find that the insights come to you when you're actually not focusing as hard on it? You know, if you spend the time prepping on it and trying to work on it, and then you go away and you drive a car, and I only know through my limited experience of, you know, when ideas come into my head, but it's the most random times: showers, driving, walking.
Very much so.
You know,
I think being physical is good. Going for a walk around the block to just sort of stew on whatever has been discussed will definitely lead to bigger ideas. I find, to be honest, half of your ideas happen during the briefing. They always say that because, you know, it's all fresh and new and your brain's kind of more engaged. To be honest, a lot of ideas happen in the briefing. Then you've got to sort of stress test them as well, you know, putting them all up on the wall, looking them at them against each other, having 10 ideas, knowing that you've got to go in with 3. So it allows you to then really sort of stress test it to see if it's going to have the legs required. I think the one thing to do is be physical, go for that walk, you know, do something, let your brain sort of, you know, zen out for a while. Usually sort of allows that idea to pop through.
You were mentioning as well that being around people to have the conversation. What's like the working from home? And I don't want you to give a judgment of, you know, it's good or bad, but from a creative standpoint, your thoughts about working from home versus working in an office, particularly with creative ideas?
Yeah, so there's both pros and cons. So I think that people do need to be together for moments in time, but I also value the time alone. So if you need to have that insightful spark sort of happen at the start of a process, I think you definitely got to be together. Like there's so much that can happen that you can bounce off other people. There's an energy in the room you just can't get across a Teams call. Being able to see things physically on a wall, you know, really makes a difference. Once you've kind of done that sort of work and you need to go away and then build it out, you need to think through the details, you need to structure it into a presentable format. You know, that's when you usually need to put your headphones on and tell everyone to go away. So working from home in that regard, you know, you do end up being much more productive, you know, for that sort of type of work, especially building presentations where you're trying to understand the flow, you know, the storytelling, you know, the sort of the different points that you need to land. It's really about having that alone time. So I can see the benefit for both, to be honest.
So car brands, you've been working on the Ford account now for, goodness now, what would it be, 12 years, 13, 14?
I think it's, about that, maybe 14.
Yeah, 14 years. What's the, what do you like most about working on car brands? Or Ford, I should say.
Or in general, yeah. When I took the job way back when, I was excited about digging into a brand. You know, a lot of our work was sort of in and out. You know, it's very transactional. You sort of put your time and energy and effort into something, and then it's done, and then you moved on to something else. So there was definitely an appeal to sort of stick with something in the long term. Now, having done that for 14 years, I definitely have a very personal relationship with Ford and have been with them in the ups and downs, and have, you know, thoroughly enjoyed and feel very invested in their success. Not just from a work point of view, but from a personal point of view as well. You know, I really love the places that we go, the lifestyles that we're sort of expressing. You know, it's great. It's camping. It's sort of traveling. It's like there's a lot of really good energy in the things that we're portraying. You know, I do have my sort of nerdy science sort of side of my character that loves nerding out on the numbers and, you know, the amount of torque and power output and, you know, the size of this and the caliber of that. Like, you know, there's a good nerding out of the details that we sort of talk through. I love seeing the new tech that comes in, some of the insane stuff that these engineers do. So there's a bit of a science aspect to cars as well, because we're trying to talk about features. Usually the engineers have done something tricky to, make that feature happen. I'm going to give you a really weird example that I was just like, whoa. When you wind your windows down and you get that whoop, whoop, whoop sort of noise, usually
When you're driving?
when you're driving, right?
Yeah.
So you wind your windows down and you get this sort of like wind noise happening.
Mm.
So one of the engineers put like just a tiny little bump next to the side mirrors that bounces the airflow off the glass to reduce that whoop noise. I was like, it's ridiculous. It's like, so how do we bring that to life, or as some sort of feature? But the amount of like thinking that went into that aerodynamics, it's like, it's awesome. I love that sort of stuff. So bringing those.
And how do you put that as a selling point? I'm just trying to think. Did you come up with a way of doing it, or are you in the process of doing it?
I think it was actually, we did this thing on the overall sound. So that was one of the elements. And then there's rubber stoppers on how the body connects to the chassis, just to all reduce the interior road noise in the vehicle. So it was a story that we actually interviewed the engineers, and he was talking about some of this stuff to reduce the sound in the cabin. I remember seeing his, diagrams of all the testing that they'd done in the wind tunnels and stuff to figure out how to shape that little lump to bounce the air off the side of the car. It's like, it's awesome,
Now, on that subject about, the technical aspects or the little nuances about filming cars, when you are working with them and you are trying to bring the idea to life, is there anything that those aspects that people probably wouldn't really understand?
Every car has a personality, right? So it's like the way you actually shoot it is supposed to reflect that personality. So with every new vehicle, in part of the sort of initial rollout process, it has something called a heights and angles pyramid, which the designers of the vehicle actually help show you, the best sort of angles and lens lengths and stuff like that of the vehicle. So sometimes if you get too close with the wide angle, it blows the whole nose of the car out and makes it all bubbly, which used to be a bit of a thing, say 10 years ago. It was a little bit more wider angle lens, getting close. Now the designers like to have more of a sort of sidewall up front sort of feeling to the cars, just in the way that they're more boxy design now. Mm-hmm. So therefore we use a shorter lens and you kind of come back a little bit. So all of that is sort of worked out at the initial stages of a launch of any vehicle, because every car looks different, every car looks better at different angles and different lens lengths. And then that becomes your sort of foundation point. So when we're filming, we're not religious about those angles, but it becomes sort of the starting point. As a general rule overall, I think get down low, get as close to the ground as you can without seeing the underneath. I always like to go off the badge at the front of the car, especially with trucks and stuff. You always position your side mirror up against the B-pillar. There's little things like that is just always in your mind eye when you're seeing a hero angle of the car. You always get a front 45, you always get a rear angle. You never shoot it really from the top because it just looks like a big white box. Just, those sorts of basic things, I suppose. But at its core, it's just understanding the personality of the vehicle and then making sure you're trying to represent that in the way that you shoot it.
So then the DOPs and the directors that you work with and the ones that are really good at it, what is it about them that gets them coming back and gets them the constant work when it's with cars? Yeah, there's
a few elements to this. One is how they use light. So cars are very reflective. You always want to shoot at the golden hour in the morning or the late afternoon to get the car bouncing in the right way, just all the reflections and everything. But I think a director will definitely have a certain mood or a character that comes through in the way that they shoot, and that's again mainly to do with light. Two is the attitude they bring to their camera angles. I kind of like to say how dirty or how clean a DOP is. I actually prefer sort of more handheld, dirty, action kind of orientated shots. You'll get some brands require much more clean, long, kind of elegant type of shots. The big, long kind of, crane type of shot portrays a certain personality, and that's all fine. But for me, I think in what I need to express with the Ford brand, that's a little bit more sort of gritty and punchy. I like to see sort of more handheld, the in-between shots, the sort of little frozen or stolen moments, that help in an edit to express more character and more personality. But having said that, you still need those big kind of glory shots to see the design of the vehicle as well, so it's getting the combination of both.
Well, you must be excited then, because I think wasn't the directive or the comment from the global CEO just late last year that every vehicle that he wants to put out, he wants it to have that Raptor feel?
He's definitely wanting to inject much more personality, sort of more energy, more of that performance kind of vibe within the brand. So that in a production sense, that makes for a much more energetic style of shoot, which is, heaps of fun.
Cars, interesting to note. I know that particularly in Australia on TV, if you have a car, it has to have 3 points of contact on at all times, or they don't allow it on TV. Interesting, those little bits that come with.
There's a lot of regulation. Yeah, a lot of regulation. It's always about the seatbelt. So, you can't have the seatbelt too close to the neck. You can't have it too close to the shoulder. It has to be right in the middle. When you've got kids in the back, they have to be a certain height. You have to make sure you're not promoting reckless driving. It has to be sort of safe conditions. Sometimes we have to, talk about how quickly we moved across a sand dune, for example. It has to be within a safe range. There's lots of regulations in terms of what you can and can't show.
Now, I take it from a personal point of view with producers, and I know you've got to work with quite a few good ones over the years, but what are the qualities that make a great agency producer?
So I think a producer is such a fundamental part of deciding on who you're going to have as your production partner. Yes, every job is sort of presented through the lens of the director and what the director will bring. But for me, I'm also looking at the producer. What sort of person they are. Have they got the flexibility? Have they got the confidence? Have they got the sort of, the sense of, I've got your back, while they're talking through the plan that they're going to bring to you for your production. So, you're spending a lot of time under sometimes very high pressure sort of situations to deliver something on budget within a very set amount of time. The sun's going to go down at the end of the day. So, stuff can happen on a shoot, and you want someone from a production point of view to be able to support you all the way. So I usually, we sort of always look for a great relationship with the producer, as well as, the great output that a director is going to bring. So in terms of what are some of the skills or characteristics of a great production team, I think it's very clear straight up, how buttoned down they are on the details versus how much we're just sort of talking, to get us through the meeting. It's also, just the charisma of the person, when stuff happens, how they're going to deal with it. That can really make a huge difference on delivering a project. You want to have a great relationship with you. I'm, really good mates with a lot of producers in the different teams across Melbourne. And we have a great time together. And when you have a great time on shoot, you usually get a much better output. So, I think it's a really fundamental part in any decision on a production team.
And it's always usually ends up the last question for newcomers. Anyone who's trying to get in as a creative, who wants to get in the door, do you have any advice for them?
I think that there's two parts to, being successful as a newcomer into the industry. One is obviously the work, right? So you've got to present yourself in a way that you can very quickly and simply demonstrate, this person can bring some quality thinking or quality input to our team. So I think that's a kind of a given. The thing that I usually look for is the personality of the person. How will they interact with the rest of the team? How will they, go under pressure? Are they going to bring a lot of fun and energy into our office? That sort of sense of confidence in character, that sense of personality, is as important as the work. Obviously, the work's very important. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, when you get that really good energy and interaction from people who you really love having them in your team, you're going to give them more work. You're going to have more conversations while you're making your lunch. More things are going to happen. So I think for any new person, it's about being out there. It's about showing, your true character. It's not just about the work that you put into your portfolio. It's about you as a person. It's about making the connections, turning up at the events, having beers with people, having chats. It's really about building you as a personal brand within this industry. And then more opportunities are going to present themselves to you.
Well, JPJ, we've covered a fair bit in the last hour.
Yes.
Discussed a few points, but like I said at the start, just appreciate you jumping on, taking the time to chat. It's been fun. It's been great to hear answers to questions that I haven't heard before. So appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Well, that's it for today. I'll make the logo bigger. Thanks for hanging out with us. We've shared some insights and stories that I hope you found useful. Whether you're just getting started or diving deeper into ad production, there's always more to explore. Keep listening, stay curious, and we'll be back soon with some more from the world of production. Take care until then.